The Cloud Upon the Sanctuary by the Counselor D. Eckharthausen. Translated by Madame Isabel de Steiger.
An introduction from adepti.com. This document is scanned from the periodical, The Unknown World. The title page of each of the 11 issues identifies it as a magazine devoted to the occult sciences, magic, mystical philosophy, alchemy, Hermetic archaeology, and the hidden problems of science literature, speculation and history. Edited by Arthur Edward Waite. This was the first appearance of Madame de Steiger's translation, beginning in January of 1895 and completed in June. In 1896 it was published as a small book with a preface by J. W. Brodianus. A second book, with an introduction by Waite, was published in 1903. Born in 1875 of Plymouth Brethren stock, Aleister Crowley had read, while still an undergraduate at Cambridge, a book by A. E. Waite and, inspired by some dark hints given in the introduction to this book, had written to Waite asking if there was a secret sanctuary to which he could gain admittance. Waite had sent a kindly, if a little unhelpful, reply, urging the young aspirant to read Madame de Steiger's translation of an 18th-century mystical work, The Cloud on the Sanctuary. Crowley did this. King, Modern Ritual Magic. Unknown to herself, translating Eckharthausen was the single most significant act of her occult life, for this was the book used by Waite to persuade Aleister Crowley to take the path that led to the Golden Dawn. Gilbert, Golden Dawn, Twilight of the Magicians. We have corrected as many of the errors left by the OCR software as we have so far found, but there are sure to be many remaining. This release is version 0.3.
Letter 1. There is no age more remarkable to the quiet observer than our own. Everywhere there is a fermentation in the minds of men, everywhere there is a battle between light and darkness, between exploded thought and living ideas, between powerless wills and living active force. In short, everywhere is there war between animal man and growing spiritual man. It is said that we live in an age of light, but it would be truer to say that we are living in an age of twilight. Here and there a luminous ray pierces through the mists of darkness, but does not light to full clearness either our reason or our hearts. Men are not of one mind, scientists dispute, and where there is discord, truth is not yet apprehended. The most important objects for humanity are still undetermined. No one is agreed either on the principle of rationality or on the principle of morality, or on the cause of the will. This proves that though we are dwelling in an age of light, we do not well understand what emanates from our hearts and what from our heads. Probably we should have this information much sooner if we did not imagine that we have the light of knowledge already in our hands, or if we would cast a look on our weakness, and recognize that we require a more brilliant illumination. We live in the times of idolatry of the intellect. We place a common torchlight upon the altar and we loudly proclaim the aurora, that now daylight is really about to appear, and that the world is emerging more and more out of obscurity into the full day of perfection, through the arts, sciences, cultured taste, and even from a purer understanding of religion. Poor mankind! To what standpoint have you raised the happiness of man? Has there ever been an age which has counted so many victims to humanity as the present? Has there ever been an age in which immorality and egotism have been greater or more dominant than in this one? The tree is known by its fruits. Madmen! With your imaginary natural reason, from whence have you the light by which you are so willing to enlighten others? Are not all your ideas borrowed from your senses which do not give you the reality but merely its phenomena? Is it not true that in time and space all knowledge is but relative? Is it not true that all which we call reality is but relative, for absolute truth is not to be found in the phenomenal world? Thus your natural reason does not possess its true essence, but only the appearance of truth and light, and the more this appearance increases and spreads, the more the essence of light inwardly fades, and the man confuses himself with this appearance and gropes vainly after the dazzling phantasmal images he conjures. The philosophy of our age raises the natural intellect into independent objectivity, and gives it judicial power. She exempts it from any superior authority, she makes it voluntary, converting it into divinity by closing all harmony in communication with God, and this God reason, which has no other law but its own, is to govern man and make him happy. Darkness able to spread light. Death capable of giving life. The truth leads man to happiness. Can you give it? That which you call truth is a form of conception empty of real matter, the knowledge of which is acquired from without and through the senses, and the understanding coordinates them by observed synthetic relationship into science or opinion. You abstract from the scriptures and tradition their moral, theoretical and practical truth, but as individuality is the principle of your intelligence, and as egotism is the incentive to your will, you do not see, by your light, the moral law which dominates, or you repel it with your will. It is to this length that the light of today has penetrated. Individuality under the cloak of false philosophy is a child of corruption. Who can pretend that the sun is in full zenith if no bright rays illuminate the earth, and no warmth vitalizes vegetation? If wisdom does not benefit man, if love does not make him happy, but very little has been done for him on the whole. Oh! If only natural man, that is, sensuous man, would only learn to see that the source of his intelligence and the incentive of his will are only his individuality, he would then seek interiorly for a higher source, and he would thereby approach that which alone can give this true element, because it is wisdom in its essential substance. Jesus Christ is that wisdom, truth and love. He, as wisdom, is the principle of reason, and the source of the purest intelligence. As love, he is the principle of morality, the true and pure incentive of the will. Love and wisdom beget the spirit of truth, interior light. This light illuminates us and makes supernatural things objective to us. It is inconceivable to what depths of error a man falls when he abandons simple truths of faith by opposing his own opinions. Our century tries to decide by its brain, intelligence, wherein lies the principle or ground of reason and morality, or the ground of the will. If the scientists were mindful, they would see that these things are better answered in the heart of the simplest man, than through their most brilliant casuistry. The practical Christian finds this incentive to the will, the principle of all morality, really and objectively in his heart, and this incentive is expressed in the following formula: love God with all thy heart, and thy neighbor as thyself. The love of God and his neighbor is the motive for the Christian's will, and the essence of love itself is Jesus Christ in us. It is in this way the principle of reason is wisdom in us, and the essence of wisdom, wisdom in its substance, is again Jesus Christ, the light of the world. Thus we find in him the principle of reason and of morality. All that I am now saying is not hyperphysical extravagance, it is reality, absolute truth, that everyone can prove for himself by experience, as soon as he receives in himself the principle of all reason and morality, Jesus Christ, being wisdom and love in essence. But the eye of the man of sensuous perception only is firmly closed to the fundamental basis of all that is true and to all that is transcendental. The intelligence which many would fain raise to legislative authority is only that of the senses, whose light differs from that of transcendental reason, as does the phosphorescent glimmer of decayed wood from the glories of sunshine. Absolute truth does not exist for sensuous man, it exists only for interior and spiritual man who possesses a suitable sensorium, or, to speak more correctly, who possesses an interior sense to receive the absolute truth of the transcendental world, a spiritual faculty which cognizes spiritual objects as objectively and naturally as the exterior senses perceive external phenomena. This interior faculty of the man spiritual, this sensorium for the metaphysical world is unfortunately not known to those who cognize only outside of it, for it is a mystery of the kingdom of God. The current incredulity towards everything which is not cognized objectively by our senses is the explanation for the misconception of truths which are, of all, most important to man. But how can this be otherwise? In order to see, one must have eyes, to hear, one must have ears. Every apparent object requires its appropriate senses. So it is that transcendental objects require their sensorium, and this said sensorium is closed in most men. Hence men judge the metaphysical world through the intelligence of their senses, even as the blind imagine colors and the deaf judge tones, without suitable senses. There is an objective and substantial ground of reason, an objective and substantial motive for the will. These two together form the new principle of life, and morality is there essentially inherent. This pure substance of reason and will, reunited in us the divine and the human, is Jesus Christ, the light of the world, who must enter into direct relationship with us, to be really recognized. This real knowledge is actual faith, in which everything takes place in spirit and in truth. Thus one ought to have a sensorium fitted for this communication, an organized spiritual sensorium, a spiritual and interior faculty able to receive this light, but it is closed to most men by their senses. This interior organ is the intuitive sense of the transcendental world, and until this intuitive sense is effective in us we can have no certainty of more lofty truths. This organism is naturally inactive since the fall, which degraded man to the world of physical senses alone. The gross matter which envelopes this interior sensorium is a film which veils the internal eye, and therefore prevents the exterior eye from seeing into spiritual realms. This same matter muffles our internal hearing, so that we are deaf to the sounds of the metaphysical world. It so paralyses our spiritual speech that we can scarcely stammer words of sacred import, words we fully pronounced once, and by virtue of which we held authority over the elements and the external world. The opening of this spiritual sensorium is the mystery of the new man, the mystery of regeneration, and of the vital union between God and man. It is the noblest object of religion on earth, that religion whose sublime goal is none other than to unite men with God in spirit and in truth. We can therefore easily see by this how it is that religion tends always towards the subjection of the senses. It does so because it desires to make the spiritual man dominant, in order that the spiritual or truly rational man may govern the man of sense. Philosophy feels this truth, only its error consists in not apprehending the true source of reason, and because she would replace it by individuality by sensuous reason. As man has internally a spiritual organ and a sensorium to receive the true principle of divine wisdom, or a true motive for the will or divine love, he has also exteriorly a physical and material sensorium to receive the appearance of light and truth. As external nature can have no absolute truth, but only phenomenally relative, therefore, human reason cannot cognize pure truth, it can but apprehend through the appearance of phenomena, which excites the lust of the eye, and in this as a source of action consists the corruption of sensuous man and the degradation of nature. This exterior sensorium in man is composed of frail matter, whereas the internal sensorium is organized fundamentally from incorruptible, transcendental, and metaphysical substance. The first is the cause of our depravity and our mortality, the second the cause of our incorruptibility and of our immortality. In the regions of material and corruptible nature mortality hides immortality, therefore all our trouble results from corruptible mortal matter. In order that man should be released from this distress, it is necessary that the immortal and incorruptible principle, which dwells within, should expand and absorb the corruptible principle, so that the envelope of the senses should be opened, and man appear in his pristine purity. This natural envelope is a truly corruptible substance found in our blood, forming the fleshly bonds binding our immortal spirits under the servitude of the mortal flesh. This envelope can be rent more or less in every man, and this places him in greater spiritual liberty, and makes him more cognizant of the transcendental world. There are 3 different degrees in the opening of our spiritual sensorium. The first degree reaches to the moral plane only, the transcendental world energizes through us but by interior action, called inspiration. The second and higher degree opens this sensorium to the reception of the spiritual and the intellectual, and the metaphysical world works in us by interior illumination. The third degree, which is the highest and most seldom attained, opens the whole inner man. It breaks the crust which fills our spiritual eyes and ears, it reveals the kingdom of spirit, and enables us to see objectively, metaphysical, and transcendental sights, hence all visions are explained fundamentally. Thus we have an internal sense of objectivity as well as externally. Only the objects and the senses are different. Exteriorly animal and sensual motives act in us and corruptible sensuous matter energizes. Interiorly it is metaphysical and indivisible substance which gains admittance within, and the incorruptible and immortal essence of our spirit receives its influence. Nevertheless, generally things pass much in the same way interiorly as they do externally. The law is everywhere the same. Hence, as the spirit or our internal man has quite other senses, and quite another objective sight from the rational man, one need not be surprised that it, the spirit, should remain an enigma for the scientists of our age, for those who have no objective sense of the transcendental and spiritual world. Hence they measure the supernatural by the measurement of the senses. However, We owe a debt of gratitude towards the philosopher Kant for his view of the truths we have promulgated. Kant has shown incontestably that the natural reason can know absolutely nothing of what is supernatural, and that it can never understand analytically or synthetically, neither can it prove the possibility of the reality of love, spirit, or of the deity. This is a great truth, lofty and beneficial for our epoch, though it is true that St. Paul has already enunciated it, 1 Corinthians chapter 2 verse 24. But the pagan philosophy of Christian scientists has been able to overlook it up to Kant. The virtue of this truth is double. First, it puts insurmountable limits to the sentiment, to the fanaticism and to the extravagance of carnal reason. Then it shows by dazzling contrast the necessity and divinity of revelation. It proves that our human reason, in its state of unfoldment, has no other objective source for the supernatural than revelation, the only source of instruction in divine things or of the spiritual world, the soul and its immortality. Hence it follows that without revelation it is absolutely impossible to suppose or conjecture anything regarding these matters. We are, therefore, indebted to Kant for proving philosophically nowadays, what long ago was taught in a more advanced and illuminated school, that without revelation no knowledge of God, neither any doctrine touching the soul, could be at all possible. It is therefore clear that a universal revelation must serve as a fundamental basis to all mundane religion. Hence, following Kant, it is clear that the transmundane knowledge is wholly inaccessible to natural reason, and that God inhabits a world of light, into which no speculation of the unfolded reason can penetrate. Thus the rational man, or man of human reason, has no sense of transcendental reality, and therefore it was necessary that it should be revealed to him, for which faith is required, because the means are given to him by faith whereby his inner sensorium unfolds, and through which he can apprehend the reality of truths otherwise incapable of being understood by the natural man. It is quite true that with new senses we can acquire sense of further reality. This reality exists already, but is not known to us, because we lack the organ by which to cognize it. One must not lay the fault to the percept, but on the receptive organ. With, however, the development of the new organ we have a new perception, a sense of new reality. Without it the spiritual world cannot exist for us, because the organ rendering it objective to us is not developed. With, however, its unfoldment, the curtain is all at once raised, the impenetrable veil is torn away, the cloud before the sanctuary lifts, a new world suddenly exists for us, scales fall from the eyes, and we are at once transported from the phenomenal world to the regions of truth. God alone is substance, absolute truth, He alone is He who is, and we are what He has made us. For Him, all exists in unity, for us, all exists in multiplicity. A great many men have no more idea of the development of the insensitive than they have of the true and objective life of the spirit, which they neither perceive nor foresee in any manner. Hence it is impossible to them to know that one can comprehend the spiritual and transcendental, and that one can be raised to the supernatural, even to vision. The great and true work of building the temple consists solely in destroying the miserable Adamic hut and in erecting a divine temple. This means, in other words, to develop in us the interior sensorium, or the organ to receive God. After this process, the metaphysical and incorruptible principle rules over the terrestrial, and man begins to live, not any longer in the principle of self-love, but in the spirit and in the truth, of which he is the temple. The moral law then evolves into love for one's neighbor in deed and in truth, whereas for the natural man it is but a simple attitude of thought, and the spiritual man, regenerated in spirit, sees all in its essence, of which the natural man has only the forms void of thought, mere empty sounds, symbols and letters, which are all dead images without interior spirit. The lofty aim of religion is the intimate union of man with God, and this union is possible in this world, but it only can be by the opening of our inner sensorium, which enables our hearts to become receptive to God. Therein are mysteries that our philosophy does not dream of, the key to which is not to be found in scholastic science. Meanwhile, a more advanced school has always existed to whom this deposition of all science has been confided, and this school was the community illuminated interiorly by the Savior, the Society of the Elect, which has continued from the first day of creation to the present time. Its members, it is true, are scattered all over the world, but they have always been united in the Spirit and in one truth. They have had but one intelligence and one source of truth, but one doctor and one master, but in whom resides substantially the whole plenitude of God, and who alone initiates them into the high mysteries of nature and the spiritual world. This community of light has been called from all time the invisible celestial church, or the most ancient of all communities, of which we will speak more fully in our next letter.
Translator's note. I am afraid that some readers who are interested in mysticism, or rather are desirous of entering into its study, may be deterred from doing so by reading these letters of the excellent mystic, Eckhart Schausen. For the reason that his doctrine, regeneration, has been so much misunderstood owing to the overfamiliarity with the ordinary signification of that deeply important word, that modern religion mostly given us. Nevertheless, no reader can fail to see that Eckhart Schausen has a very real and vital reason for all he says. His language is extraordinarily simple, so much so that many may consider that he hides deeper matter purposely. This is not quite the case. In all Catholic and central truth there are various meanings, not opposing ones, but each opening, as it were, according to the grade of the student's own spiritual understanding. Indeed, it is very frequently urged against mystic and alchemic writings that they purposely and selfishly veil the truth. No doubt in many cases it has been purposely done, for very sincerely good reasons that real inquiry would amply endorse, but it is by no means a true bill against mystic writings that the language is deliberately symbolic, allegoric, or in a sort of cipher code, as it were, in which one word is mischievously meant for another and so forth. I have heard all alchemic works described, indeed once thought so myself, as a farrago of pure bosh. But we know, as most people nowadays who pretend to any philosophy at all, that there are other planes of nature besides the physical, and that mystic and alchemical writings are not generally dealing with physical or mental matters and nomenclature. They refer to higher planes of nature, and if a student is able to enter into higher planes, I understand that the terms and expressions all take simple and rightful place. But all that a student can do in his first study in these matters is to try and discern somewhat where the planes change and where the writer means literally on the higher plane or parabolically on the physical, or on what plane is the literalness. But most alchemic writing is hyperphysical. Origen says, to the literal-minded, or carnal, we teach the gospel in the historic or literal way, but to the proficients, fired with the love of divine wisdom, we impart the logos. Also we must remember that these writers were spiritual giants, men who had gone through the vital process of regeneration, and who wrote to others in like condition, not to the carnal-minded or literal man, who have their spiritual sensorium, as Eckartshausen calls it, still sealed. We are, therefore, grateful when a spiritual giant like Eckartshausen writes as he does in simpler fashion, one more suitable to the plane of intellectuality on which we usually are. He tells us literally that man has fallen from his high estate, as we have all been taught in common Christianity, and he proceeds to point out the spiritual rationale whereby man may attain his former greatness. In doing so, he explains in a most suggestive manner the real value of the rites and ceremonies of Catholic Christendom, the Church as he teaches being the outer manifestation of that inner society, the nameless one, that society of the elect which has always existed, and must still exist, for the protection of mankind. If this sacred circle, this celestial church, did not subsist, our earthly sinful churches could not exist. That they do is a proof of its holy guardianship. Eckartshausen's letters on the subject explanatory of this position are most instructive. There are doubtless a few elect souls who are so richly laden with the 10 talents they have earned in preceding lives, that they can, so to say, take the kingdom of heaven with violence and obtain their regeneration and immortality early in this life, without possibly belonging to any society, whether church organization or otherwise, but to most people this is impossible, and we then, as humbler students, do well to lay heed to the great importance of Christian rites and ceremonies, especially that of the Sacred Supper. This is, of course, not new teaching to instructed Catholics, but I would respectfully suggest that Eckartshausen lead the understanding to higher ground and higher possibilities, as a permitted initiate, than church teaching generally can do, because Catholic doctrine cannot fully explain. It is her function only to enunciate ex cathedra's the legitimately authorized channel of communication, but certain writers, initiates and regenerate men, have special offices, of instructors and explainers. Therefore those people who have not the gift of faith to receive enunciated doctrine, have indeed much to be thankful for in that there are such writers who are permitted to explain the reason why of doctrine and dogma. To minds, then, who are not gifted with faith, or who have not attained to it, the writings of the mystics are priceless, as no doubt through them the student who only commenced the quest through mere but honest curiosity and desire, if, however, he continues sincere and earnest, can without doubt rise not only to the region of faith, but in addition with a clear understanding, and he then is in a still better condition for further advancement. Mad is that person who with the grace and gift of faith to commence with has left his talent untouched. The cloud upon the sanctuary is written in 6 letters, and they show the meaning of revelation, the means whereby man can receive it, the supreme importance of man's regeneration and the means whereby he can attain to it. And I may here say that a regenerated man in mystic phraseology is equivalent to the Mahatma, or maybe more, in modern theosophic terms, it means a master, and until man attains to this rank he is not able to fully recognize the master, so must always remain until that time outside the temple, not yet fit to enter within the sacred precincts and be hailed as a true builder by the master builder himself. Regeneration is moreover the only means by which he gains freedom from karma, and is thenceforth freed from the circle of necessity or rebirth. There is one other matter to note, both in reading sacred writ and mystic writers, that if we find one meaning pretty clear throughout we may conclude we have one key, but that is all, and because we understand this side of the truth is just the reason that we have not all the truth. If we keep this well in our minds it will be a useful preventive against spiritual pride, for it will keep us always respectful to our brothers and sisters' versions of the matter. Nevertheless there is something so real, so solid, so concrete in the presentment of mystic truth that if that foundation be firmly realized it is remarkable how much more easily the building is raised than we could imagine while wandering in the phantasmal regions of astral revelations, that realm of chaos out of and from which man has been lifted, by being created rational man, but towards which he too easily returns on a retrograde course. We must also note that Eckartshausen lived and wrote at the period of the French Revolution, at an era very similar to our own in all but its sad consummation. Magic was the fashion, and quite as much was known then on these matters as is known now. There were spiritual circles, occult societies, brotherhoods, and a great searching into the hidden things of the spirit. We have St. Martin's valuable authority at that period for thinking very highly of Eckhartshausen as a man who worked and thought centrally, and whose writings commanded his highest respect.
Letter 2. It is necessary, my dear brothers in the Lord, to give you a clear idea of the interior church, of that illuminated community of God which is scattered throughout the world, but which is governed by one truth and united in one spirit. This enlightened community has existed since the first day of the world's creation, and its duration will be to the last day of time. This community possesses a school, in which all who thirst for knowledge are instructed by the Spirit of wisdom itself, and all the mysteries of God and of nature are preserved in this school for the children of light. Perfect knowledge of God, of nature, and of humanity are the objects of instruction in this school. It is from her that all truths penetrate into the world. She is the school of the prophets, and of all who search for wisdom, and it is in this community alone that truth and the explanation of all mystery is to be found. It is the most hidden of communities, yet possesses members from many circles, of such is this school. From all time there has been an exterior school based on the interior one, of which it is but the outer expression. From all time, therefore, there has been a hidden assembly, a society of the elect, of those who sought for and had capacity for light, and this interior society was called the interior sanctuary or church. All that the external church possesses in symbol, ceremony, or rite is the letter expressive outwardly of the spirit of truth residing in the interior sanctuary. Hence this sanctuary, composed of scattered members, but tied by the bonds of perfect unity and love, has been occupied from the earliest ages in building the grand temple through the regeneration of humanity, by which the reign of God will be manifest. This society is in the communion of those who have most capacity for light, i.e., the elect. The elect are united in truth, and their chief is the light of the world himself, Jesus Christ, the one anointed in light, the single mediator for the human race, the way, the truth, and the life, primitive light, wisdom, and the only medium by which man can return to God. The interior church was formed immediately after the fall of man, and received from God at first hand the revelation of the means by which fallen humanity could be again raised to its rights and delivered from its misery. It received the primitive charge of all revelation and mystery. It received the key of true science, both divine and natural. But when men multiplied, the frailty of man and his weakness necessitated an exterior society which veiled the interior one, and concealed the spirit and the truth in the letter. Because many people were not capable of comprehending great interior truth, and the danger would have been too great in confiding the most holy to incapable people. Therefore, interior truths were wrapped in external and perceptible ceremonies, so that men, by the perception of the outer, which is the symbol of the interior, might by degrees be enabled safely to approach the interior spiritual truths. But the inner truth has always been confided to him who in his day had the most capacity for illumination, and he became the sole guardian of the original trust, as high priest of the statuary. When it became necessary that interior truths should be enfolded in exterior ceremony and symbol, on account of the real weakness of men who were not capable of bearing the light of light, then exterior worship began. It was, however, always the type and symbol of the interior, that is to say, the symbol of the true homage offered to God in spirit and in truth. The difference between spiritual and animal man, and between rational and sensual man, made the exterior and interior imperative. Interior truth passed into the external wrapped in symbol and ceremony, so that sensuous man could observe, and be gradually thereby led to interior truth. Hence external worship was symbolically typical of interior truths, and of the true relationship between man and God before and after the fall, and of his most perfect reconciliation. All the symbols of external worship are based upon the three fundamental relations: the fall, the reconciliation, and the complete atonement. The care of the external service was the occupation of priests, and every father of a family was in the ancient times charged with this duty. First fruits and the firstborn among animals were offered to God, symbolizing that all that preserves and nourishes us comes from Him, also that animal man must be killed to make room for rational and spiritual man. The external worship of God would never have been separated from interior service but for the weakness of man, which tends too easily to forget the Spirit in the letter, but the Spirit of God is vigilant to note in every nation those who are able to receive light, and they are employed as agents to spread the light according to man's capacity, and to revivify the dead letter. Through these divine instruments the interior truths of the sanctuary were taken into every nation, and modified symbolically according to their customs, capacity for instruction, climate, and receptiveness. So that the external types of every religion, worship, ceremonies and sacred books in general have more or less clearly, as their object of instruction, the interior truths of the sanctuary, by which man, but only in the latter days, will be conducted to the universal knowledge of the one absolute truth. The more the external worship of a people has remained united with the spirit of esoteric truth, the purer its religion, but the wider the difference between the symbolic letter and the invisible truth, the more imperfect has become the religion, even so far among some nations as to degenerate into polytheism. Then the external form entirely parted from its inner truth when ceremonial observances without soul or life remained alone. When the germs of the most important truths had been carried everywhere by God's agents, He chose a certain people to raise up a vital symbol destined by Him to manifest forth the means by which He intended to govern the human race in its present condition, and by which it would be raised into complete purification and perfection. God Himself communicated to this people its exterior religious legislation. He gave all the symbols and enacted all the ceremonies, and they contained the impress, as it were, of the great esoteric truth of the sanctuary. God consecrated this external church in Abraham, gave commandments through Moses, and it received its highest perfection in the double message of Jesus Christ, existing personally in poverty and suffering, and by the communication of His Spirit in the glory of the resurrection. Now, as God Himself laid the foundation of the external church, the whole of the symbols of external worship formed the of science of the temple and of the priests in those days, because the mysteries of the most sacred truths became external through revelation alone. The scientific acquaintance of this holy symbolism was the science to unite fallen man once more with God. hence religion received its name from being the science of rebinding man with God, to bring man back to his origin. One sees plainly by this pure idea of religion in general that unity in religion is within the inner sanctuary, and that the multiplicity of external religions can never alter the true unity which is at the base of every exterior. The wisdom of the ancient temple alliance was preserved by priests and by prophets. To the priests was confided the external, the letter of the symbol, hieroglyphics. The prophets had the charge of the inner truth, and their occupation was to continually recall the priest to the spirit in the letter, when inclined to lose it. The science of the priests was that of the knowledge of exterior symbol. That of the prophets was experimental possession of the truth of the symbols. In the interior the spirit lived. There was, therefore, in the ancient alliance a school of prophets and of priests, the one occupying itself with the spirit in the emblem, the other with the emblem itself. The priests had the external possession of the ark, of the showbread, of the candlesticks, of the manna, of Aaron's rod, and the prophets were in interior possession of the inner spiritual truth which was represented exteriorly by the symbols just mentioned. The external church of the ancient alliance was visible, the interior church was always invisible, must be invisible, and yet must govern all, because force and power are alone confided to her. When the divine external worship abandoned the interior worship it fell, and God proved by a remarkable chain of circumstances that the letter could not exist without the spirit, that it is only their two lead to the spirit, and it is useless and even rejected by God if it fails in its object. As the spirit of nature extends to the most sterile depths to vivify and preserve and cause growth in everything susceptible to its influence, likewise the spirit of light spreads itself interiorly among nations to animate everywhere the dead letter by the living spirit. This is why we find a Job among idolaters, a Melchizedek among strange nations, a Joseph with the Egyptian priests, a Moses in the country of Midian, as living proofs the interior community of those who are capable of receiving light was united by one spirit and one truth in all times and in all nations. To these agents of light from the one inner community was united the chief of all agents, Jesus Christ himself, in the midst of time as priest after the order of Melchizedek. The divine agents of the ancient alliance hitherto represented only specialized perfections of God, therefore a powerful movement was required which should show all at once, all in one. A universal type appeared, which gave the real touch of perfect unity to the picture, which opened a fresh door, and destroyed the number of the slavery of humanity. The law of love began when the image emanating from wisdom itself showed to man all the greatness of his being, vivified him anew by every force, assured him of his immortality, and raised his intellectual status to that of being the true temple for the Spirit. This chief agent of all, this Savior of the world and universal regenerator, claimed man's whole attention to the primitive truth, whereby he can preserve his existence and recover his former dignity. Through the conditions of his own abasement he laid the base of the redemption of man, and he promised to accomplish it completely one day through his Spirit. He showed also truly in part among his apostles all that should come to pass in the future to all the elect. He linked the chain of the community of light among the elect, to whom he sent the Spirit of truth, and confided to them the true primitive instruction in all divine and natural things, as a sign that he would never forsake his community. When the letter and symbolic worship of the external church of the ancient alliance had been realized by the incarnation of the Savior, and verified in his person, new symbols became requisite for external use, which shewed us through the letter the future accomplishment of universal redemption. The rites and symbols of the external Christian church were formed after the pattern of these unchangeable and fundamental truths, announcing things of a strength and of an importance impossible to describe, and revealed only to those who knew the innermost sanctuary. This sanctuary remains changeless, though external religion receives in the course of time and circumstances varied modification, entailing separation from the interior spirit which can alone preserve the letter. The profane idea of wishing to civilize all that is Christian, and to Christianize all that is political, changed the exterior edifice, and covered with the shadow of death all that was interior light and life. Hence divisions and heresies, and the spirit of sophistry ready to expound the letter when it had already lost the essence of truth. Current incredulity increased corruption to its utmost point, attacking the edifice of Christianity in its fundamental parts, and the sacred interior was mingled with the exterior, already enfeebled beta ignorance of weak man. Then was born deism. This brought forth materialism, which looked on the union of man with superior forces as imaginary. Then finally came forth, partly from the head and partly from the heart, the last degree of man's degradation, atheism. In the midst of all this, truth reposes inviolable in the inner sanctuary. Faithful to the spirit of truth, which promised never to abandon its community, the members of the interior church lived in silence, but in real activity, and united the science of the temple of the ancient alliance with the spirit of the great Savior of man, the spirit of the interior alliance, waiting humbly the great moment when the Lord will call them, and will assemble his community in order to give every dead letter external force and life. This interior community of light is the reunion of all those capable of receiving light as elect, and it is known as the communion of saints. The primitive receptacle for all strength and truth, confided to it from all time, it alone, says St. Paul, is in the possession of the science of the saints. By it the agents of God were formed in every age, passing from the interior to the exterior, and communicating spirit and life to the dead letter as already said. This illuminated community has been through time the true school of God's Spirit, and considered as school, it has its chair, its doctor, it possesses a rule for students, it has forms and objects for study, and, in short, a method by which they study. It has, also, its degrees for successive development. To higher altitudes. The first and lowest degree consists in the moral good, by which the single will, subordinated to God, is led to God by the pure motive of willing with and to Jesus Christ, which it does through faith. The means by which the spirit of this school acts are called inspirations. The second degree consists in the rational intellectuality, by which the understanding of the man of virtue, who is united to God, is crowned with wisdom and the light of knowledge, and the means which the Spirit uses to produce this is called interior illumination. The third and highest degree is the entire opening of our inner sensorium, by which the inner man perceives objectively and really metaphysical verities. This is the highest degree when faith passes into open vision, and the means the Spirit uses for this are real visions. These are the 3 degrees of the school for true interior wisdom, that of the illuminated society. The same Spirit which ripens men for this community also distributes its degrees by the coaction of the ripened subject. This school of wisdom has been forever most secretly hidden from the world because it is invisible and submissive solely to divine government. It has never been exposed to the accidents of time and to the weakness of man. Because only the most capable were chosen for it, and the spirits who selected made no error. Through this school were developed the germs of all the sublime sciences, which were first received by external schools, then clothed in other forms, and, hence degenerating. This society of sages communicated, according to time and circumstances, unto the exterior societies their symbolic hieroglyphs, in order to attract man to the great truths of their interior. But all exterior societies subsist through this interior one giving them its spirit. As soon as external societies wish to be independent of the interior one, and to transform a temple of wisdom into a political edifice, the interior society retires and leaves only the letter without the spirit. It is thus that secret external societies of wisdom were nothing but hieroglyphic screens, the truth remaining inviolable in the sanctuary so that she might never be profaned. In this interior society man finds wisdom, and with her, not the wisdom of this world, which is but scientific knowledge, which revolves round the outside but never touches the center, in which is contained all strength, but true wisdom and men obeying her. All disputes, all controversies, all the things belonging to the false cares of this world, fruitless discussions, useless germs of opinions which spread the seeds of disunion, all error, schisms, and systems are banished. Neither calumny nor scandal are known. Every man is honored. Satire, that spirit which loves to make its neighbor smart, is unknown. Love alone reigns. Want and feebleness are protected, and rejoicings are made at the elevation and greatness which man acquires. We must not, however, imagine this society resembles any secret society, meeting at certain times, choosing its leaders and members, united by special objects. All societies, be what they may, can but come after this interior illuminated circle. This society knows none of the formalities which belong to the outer rings, the work of man. In this kingdom of power all outward forms cease. God himself is the power always present. The best man of his times, the chief himself, does not always know all the members, but the moment when it is the will of God that he should accomplish any object, he finds them in the world with certainty to work for that purpose. This community has no outside barriers. He who may be chosen by God is as the first, he presents himself among the others without presumption, and he is received by the others without jealousy. If it be necessary that real members should meet together, they find and recognize each other with perfect certainty. No disguise can be used, neither hypocrisy nor dissimulation could hide the characteristic qualities of this society, they are too genuine. All illusion is gone, and things appear in their true form. No one member can choose another, unanimous choice is required. All men are called, the called may be chosen, if they become ripe for entrance. Anyone can look for the entrance, and any man who is within can teach another to seek for it, but only he who is fit can arrive inside. Unprepared men occasion disorder in a community, and disorder is not compatible with the sanctuary. This thrusts out all who are not homogeneous. Worldly intelligence seeks this sanctuary in vain. Fruitless also will be the efforts of malice to penetrate these great mysteries. All is undecipherable to him who is not ripe. He can see nothing, read nothing in the interior. He who is ripe is joined to the chain, perhaps often where he thought least likely, and at a point of which he knew nothing himself. Seeking to become ripe, should be effort of him who sees wisdom. But there are methods by which ripeness is attained, for in this Holy Communion is the primitive storehouse of the most ancient and original science of the human race, with the primitive mysteries also of all science. It is the unique and really illuminated community which is absolutely in possession of the key to all mystery, which knows the center and source of all nature and creation. It is a society which unites superior strength to its own, and counts its members from more than one world. It is the society whose members form a theocratic republic, which one day will be the regent mother of the whole world.
Translator's note. There is an expression in the third paragraph which is puzzling. The literal translation would of course be many worlds. The same word is also used in the last paragraph. It counts its members from more than one world. I confess I am at a loss to give the real meaning. Merely translating it, society, circle, set of people, would at once give it a sense of limitation, from all kindreds and peoples, would seem the best way to convey the idea of an eclectic but universal choice. I can't think it conveys the meaning that another planet or world would imply. There is a paragraph in Carpenter's work, From Adam's Peak to Elephanta, which I must here mention. He says apropos of the rites and ceremonies of a Hindu temple, the theory is that all the ceremonies have inner and mystic meanings, which meanings in due time are declared to those who are fit, and that thus the temple, institutions, and ceremonies constitute a great ladder by which men can rise at last to those inner truths which lie beyond all formulas and are contained in no creed. This is exactly the argument of Eckhart Schausen, with the exception of the last phrase, as, au contraire, he would say that creeds are quite different to formulas, creeds being synthetic enunciation of verities, so shorn of all but the absolutely necessary words that no one but masters of theology can at all correctly enlarge them. However, the interesting part is the similar view of the importance of the outer ceremony on the part of the Hindu priests. It would be insulting the understandings of my readers if I were to point out the obvious fact that though Eckhart Schausen speaks so constantly of the church rites and ceremonies, he is not alluding to any special church. In the next letter, which is an extremely interesting one, the word temple is substituted for église. A church properly speaking means a body of worshippers. A temple means a building containing a shrine. This distinction is of importance. In France, the RC community call the Protestant places of worship temples, which according to their views they cannot be, as they would not consider that the Protestants have the sacred vessels or offices, or anything really pertaining to a shrine. Nevertheless, it is also clear that Eckhart Schausen speaks with so much respect of rites and ceremonies, symbols and hieroglyphics, which he may take otherwise than necessarily Egyptian, of course, that one feels that he must have thought with more respect of those churches that have kept a larger amount of rite and ceremony than those who deliberately docked them. These latter emulated too soon the exalted condition of being beyond formulas, and so fell below it, the tendency of mankind in a natural condition being towards outer manifestation. This, of course, is but a preliminary stage, but a long way ahead of the condition of not feeling any desire for such manifestation. In speaking of the elect, we cannot be sufficiently careful not to fall into any error of thought on this matter by being influenced by any dregs of Calvinistic limitation. We cannot exalt our ideas on the subject high enough, for in fact we do not know anything at all about who and what are the elect. Our mystic is certainly not writing on ordinary lines, neither to ordinary people. One may be inclined then to say, "Oh, then it does not concern us," but it does, for we never know when we may turn from the ordinary into the extraordinary. All we have to do is our best. We certainly shall be in the right if we exalt all theology, especially as conveyed through mystic writers, who seem to have the power of exalting the gold into still purer sublimation, only it is only in appearance, as high as our imagination will go. The possibility of reaching this region will always be open to us, if we do not fall into the snare of imagining that we can easily experimentally arrive at this altitude. All the letters of Eckhart Schausen point to a region of thought and action quite beyond recognized theology. We therefore infer that he and other mystics give us some of the information known to the inner sanctuary, and not taught generally in the outer circles, that is, in the churches of Christendom. We must certainly read the words, Christian mysteries, between the lines. If we said they mean the sacraments, especially of the Holy Supper, we should limit these mysteries to those that are acknowledged as such and given generally to Christian Europe. We must all of us see an advanced grade beyond the one which we many of us can achieve, a grade of high initiation which will open these mysteries to us, an attitude of thought which at least must command our respect, and which certainly if faithfully maintained would in itself do much to advance us. The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. Wisdom, as Eckhart Schausen points out, being something truly comprehensive.